The more I awaken to these systems and structures of how they have shaped me and made me, the less I have tolerance for them to continue shaping and manipulating others. And many, many people have said this: awakening is the worst thing that can happen to me. Because when I'm awake, I'm aware. And when I'm aware, I can no longer remain silent. And the more I'm awake, the less I'm afraid actually to address this. Even fear of death begins to move away from me because I know that I'm doing the right thing.
As a CIA officer in Iraq during the war, I lived in a world where power meant weapons, money, and force. And yet, I kept encountering a deeper power. Policies changed, governments shifted, military plans often failed, but connection to each other, to the earth, and to something larger than ourselves kept proving more powerful than violence and destruction. I'm Janessa Gans Wilder, and this is Peace is Power, a podcast exploring how peace will change your life and our world. Each week, I speak with leaders, artists, activists, and spiritual thinkers around one core question: what if true power is not domination, but connection? Welcome to Peace is Power.
Hi friends, we've got a doozy for you today. My guest is Sami Awad, a Palestinian peacebuilder, author, and nonviolence practitioner from Bethlehem. He founded Holy Land Trust, a longtime leader in Palestinian nonviolent resistance, and is currently the co-director of Nonviolence International. Sami's new book, The Sacred Awakening, is a powerful call to become peacemakers and revolutionaries in this time. A call to awaken, inwardly and outwardly, and to resist violence in the most powerful way. I've known Sami for a long time. I first connected with him in 2010, and I was so moved by his vision that Euphrates Institute created a new program, the Visionary of the Year Award, simply to honor him. My own first time in the Holy Land was in 2005, and at that time, I'd never heard a Palestinian, or really anyone, speak the way Sami did about trauma, healing, oneness with the other, and the deep interconnectedness between this conflict and conflicts around the world. For Sami, these have never been abstract ideas, but they lead directly to practical action. I remember listening to him with my eyes wide open and my heart on fire. He gave language to something I deeply believed, but had rarely heard spoken so clearly. I think you'll feel that same way listening to him today. Here's my conversation with Sami Awad. Sami, it's on. It's on till the break of dawn.
We're on. Always. I get to see you.
Oh, I'm so excited.
I'm enjoying seeing you and talking to you often. I just want to say that.
I know, but we just need to connect in person.
I know.
I mean, thank God for technology. But I was just thinking how when you talked about Jesus closing the distance and being there with his presence, I thought how different presence is nowadays. It is through this. It's through WhatsApp. It's through the phone. But there's something different about actual presence in real life, IRL. Maybe 2026 is the year. Last time I was in the Holy Land was 2020. When was COVID? 2022 or 2023. Anyway, I got COVID in Tel Aviv. That was the only time I've gotten COVID. So I was stuck in Jerusalem. I was stuck in the American Colony Hotel for 10 days. Not a bad place to be. Room service and everything. So before we zoom out and get to the good stuff, Sami, like consciousness and the nature of man and the universe, I want to zoom in and start with context, as you put in the book, which I love. Can you bring us into your lived reality right now, where you find yourself on the planet, and what is it bringing up for you?
Yeah, so where I am now in this moment is in a little town called Bethlehem, in the land called Palestine, in the Holy Land, and as some people say, the land with many, many names. And I am in my home talking to you today in actually a little town called Beit Jala near Bethlehem, which is part of it. And I find myself coming back from a journey that I was on that included a speaking tour in the US, visiting Cuba, going on a solidarity mission to Cuba to break the siege in Cuba.
That's right.
And then going to Portugal, where I did my first course in Sacred Awakening in a community in Portugal called Tamera. And landing back here in a situation that the whole time I was away actually was the time where there was the war or the attacks on Iran and back and forth between Israel, the United States, and Iran. And I had left actually 2 days before that started and came back pretty much a week after it stopped. So that whole time I was away and coming back to the reality of life for Palestinians. I mean, it's occupation plus usually. So it was occupation plus the bombs that are flying over us and hitting some of our areas. It's closures, it's roadblocks, it's lack of movement, it's unprecedented amounts of violence by settlers towards Palestinians. Quite terrifying, actually, quite scary to come back to a place where if I want to go now to visit friends, for example, I had a friend who was in a car accident in Hebron, and I had to think a lot, and it's usually half an hour away. If I want to get in my car and drive on a road where I, as a Palestinian, can get attacked by settlers just by being on that road.
At any moment.
Any moment. You never know when it's going to come. And so the situation is quite bleak. Zero talks about anything stopping the violence. Zero talks about anything stopping Israeli expansion into the occupied territories. Nothing. Complete freedom to do whatever and whenever they want. And so I come back to a population that is becoming more and more resigned, more and more hopeless, more and more lacking any hope for anything in the future, not even to think about the future, just day by day, people are living here.
Are there curfews? I mean, I get that people are having to curtail their activities, stay at home when they might otherwise go out. But other than watching it on the news, are you seeing tanks around? Are there more checkpoints? Is the day-to-day life different?
Well, every single road that connects anything Palestinian has a roadblock on it or a gate. I think there's over 1,000 gates and roadblocks that have been placed in the West Bank over the last 2 years. And so one of the things that we just never know when you want to leave, like for example, there's a road not far from me to leave Beit Jala to go to other towns. Yesterday the gate was closed for absolutely no reason.
Wow.
Just closed. And then if you're lucky, you try to find another way out and around to do that. In the cities themselves, in what we call areas A, the cities that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority, the army usually comes in, the Israeli army comes in and does incursions. They come in to arrest, they come in to demolish homes, they come in searching for somebody, they've come in and assassinated. They don't usually set long-term curfews when they do that, but they come in and out. And you never know, you could be just driving in the street of Bethlehem and all of a sudden there are 6 Israeli army jeeps driving next to you. Going to do something, or armed vehicles. And so that's one of the things that we face quite often here in Bethlehem. Surprisingly, sometimes the Israeli police is even inside our cities giving traffic tickets.
Wow.
That's how confident they are that they could come into our cities and do whatever they want. And they give traffic tickets and leave, and you have to pay the traffic tickets if you receive them from the Israeli police or the Palestinian police.
I appreciate the context, because I was thinking this morning about one of the formative influences that were for you, that your grandmother, her context was one of her husband being killed, her becoming a refugee, and very, very similar, circumstances. And I think she modeled for you a different response than the norm. And I wondered if you could share that story.
Yeah, I love sharing the story of my grandmother. Her name was Huda. Huda means gift as well. So she was a gift to us as a family, a gift to the world, I think, as well, through us. And as you said, in the Nakba in 1948, 75% of Palestinians lost their homes and became refugees. Our family was not exempt from that reality. Her husband was killed in the war. He wasn't killed in combat. He was actually trying to protect his family by putting a white flag to show that there are civilians living in the house that they are living in, not anybody that was armed, and he was shot by a sniper. It was my grandmother, their children, the neighbors who buried the father in the courtyard of the house. He couldn't even get a proper burial. And then a few days later, when the Jewish forces came and took over, they evicted everybody who was non-Jewish in that neighborhood. And then people sometimes say, what do you mean non-Jewish in that neighborhood? And this is just to remind people that in this land before 1948, before the Zionist project came to this land, even before 1948, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in the same land together. I'm not calling it utopia. I'm not calling it heaven, but they lived. They took care of each other. They understood each other. They appreciated each other. Any struggle that we actually had between these three religions was instigated by outsiders. Anytime any of these three religions had a battle here, if it's from the times of the Crusades till this day, it was instigated from the outside. And so in this neighborhood where they lived as neighbors with each other. They understood their differences and appreciated that about them. But again, when the Jewish forces came and took over, they demanded that the Muslims and the Christians be kicked out. And the family ended up refugee. And my grandmother, who wasn't a theologian, she wasn't a pastor, she didn't study theology, but she had the pure theology of understanding that her understanding of her faith as a Christian meant that we are called to love the enemy. We are called to forgiveness. We are called to reconciliation. We are called to peacemaking. And she always insisted that as a family, we will never seek revenge and retaliation for what happened to us during that time, that we will gain nothing from that. And always insisted that we will never turn our back when there is injustice happening, when there is violence happening, that we will proactively engage in stopping violence and addressing violence and being peacemakers. This is the thing, being peacemakers. And I always say her definition of justice was not revenge, not retaliation, not making them pay for what they did to us, but the proactive engagement in peace and reconciliation with those who have harmed us is justice. And that's what she taught us as children, and as our grandchildren, as her children, and then something that we continue as a family to try to practice. But she planted the seeds. For me, I know she planted the seeds that have shaped my life, for sure.
Hey listeners, if you're wanting to go deeper in your peacebuilding journey, come visit us at euphrates.org. Euphrates Institute is the organization I founded after my time serving in Iraq during the war. We offer courses, resources, and a global community of peacebuilders from more than 60 countries who are learning how to practice peace within and without. You can learn more at euphrates.org.
Can I just push back a second, Sami? Because as I'm listening to that, I'm understanding that nothing would bring her husband back. But by fighting back or pushing back, couldn't she have regained the house, the land, pride, dignity? What do you think that was she giving up something, or was she just seeing a better way forward?
Well, for her, what she was clear is revenge and retaliation was not going to bring anything back. She always was a refugee. She always said she was a refugee. She always hoped that she would, of course, return to her home. She never gave up that, but she understood that violence is not the way. That's where she was making that position. That's why she encouraged us to engage in nonviolence even before she even knew the word, and peacemaking, because the way that maybe we will have a chance to get something back is a sense of justice, is by engaging with those who have done the harm to us, to talk with them, to resisting them nonviolently, to open them up for the injustices that they have done, and then seeing what possibilities emerge. But violence was never the answer for her. Choosing violence was not the way that we will get anything back. And for sure, this is something that has been proven on and on. I mean, when we are in resistance to a militarized, structured system, that militarism is embedded in the fabric of Israeli society, where children are trained to be soldiers from a young age and trained to carry guns and drive tanks from a very young age, then for sure, violence, armed resistance is not going to be a way to gain anything for us as Palestinians. But something that we are committed to is we believe in the weapons, let me call them, of nonviolence, of resistance. Resistance has always been part of our mission as a family and life. And so we resist injustice, we resist occupation, we resist apartheid for the sake of peace and for the sake of gaining what we have lost.
When did you make that your own? I know it was modeled for you from your grandmother, but was there a time or an instance, or maybe many, where you made that your own, and did it feel like in the moment it was weak and this was the path that you needed to take? Did you feel a sense of empowerment come over you in choosing that?
Yeah, the story that comes to me is when I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, one of my uncles really took this nonviolent call to heart. He even established a center called the Palestinian Center for the Study of Nonviolence, where he began to teach and train Palestinians and Israelis working together to resist occupation through nonviolence. And as a 12-year-old kid, I loved my uncle. I loved going with him to the meetings, to the places he went to. And at one point, it was actually my first action, where it was planting olive trees in a land that was threatened to be confiscated by a settlement not far from Bethlehem, in an area called Tekoa. And as a 12-year-old, I went with my uncle, a child. I was with him. And I remember him and the organizers were saying to us as Palestinians, Israelis, and internationals that were there, no matter what happens, you are here to plant olive trees. We are trying to save this farmer's land from being confiscated, and the way to do that is to plant it with olive trees. If the soldiers comes, if the settler comes, the only job is for you to plant olive trees. That's why you are here for. And so I grabbed my little tree and I grabbed my little shovel and started digging a hole. And soon enough, soldiers, Israeli soldiers and settlers came and started disturbing and disrupting and trying to stop us. And all I could think of was plant the tree. You're here to plant the tree. And I continued digging my little hole in the ground. I put the olive tree in. And as soon as I did that, a soldier came from behind me, reached behind my back, grabbed the tree from the hole that wasn't still covered with dirt and threw it on some rocks nearby. And it was that moment, Janessa, it was that moment where I had to make a decision. As a 12-year-old, having that experience for the first time, being confronted by a soldier, I'm very aware I could run, I could cry, I could go to my uncle, I could go back to the bus. And all I could remember was, you're here to plant the olive tree. You're here to plant the olive tree. So as soon as I saw the shadow of the soldier walk away from me, I grabbed the tree, put it back in the land, and covered it with dirt. That was the moment that changed my life. That was when nonviolence became real for me. It became the word I always use to say, if somebody asks me for another word to compare nonviolence, I say empowerment. I felt an immense sense of empowerment at that time, that I was able to resist, to be steadfast, to do what I came to do, even with the threat. And so that was the turning point in my life.
Did the fear go away in that moment of empowerment?
Completely. I had zero fear in that moment, nothing. A full sense of pride, full sense of accomplishment came over me in that moment. It was amazing. They talk about the 1 minute that changed your life. That was it for me.
So I think I told you I've been reading, I finished 500 pages. That book is so good, the Jim Lawson Jr. book on nonviolence. And he describes the weirdest thing, where during the civil rights movement, they'd be getting beaten by, they were sitting at the lunch counters, taken off, thrashed. And that afterwards, these folks would recount that they didn't feel the blows and they didn't even feel afraid. They just felt it was almost like a moral power that overpowered the physical blows. It was proven in their experience to be. And then the folks in law enforcement were like, we have a problem on our hands. The Negro has lost his fear. And then they sensed that was a turning point, because if a population is not afraid, then you can't control them.
Exactly.
But I wanted to hear from you if that was what you had felt, even as a 12-year-old, something mystical about that.
Without a doubt. I felt it as a 12-year-old. I told you, this is one moment that has just really been imprinted in my life. That day, that experience, I could remember the temperature, the heat, the atmosphere itself, the sounds of the people, the sound of the lawyer yelling at the people, sit down, don't move away from your trees, when the soldiers tried to pick them up. It was a complete sense of empowerment. It was a turning point in my life. And then, just similar to the example you've had, I've had many, many examples since then. In this incident, I wasn't beaten up. I wasn't physically attacked by the soldier. But I've been in many, many incidences where all of a sudden I find myself smiling as I'm getting beaten up. It's just this sense of calmness, of joy, of knowing that you are actually winning. The attention that you are getting is something that is really triggering them. So something is moving in them that's making them do this to you. And it's their fear, actually. It's their fear taking over, because they don't want you to succeed. They don't want nonviolence to win. They don't want justice to happen. And so they try to suppress it because they are afraid of losing their power and their control. And there are these split moments where you begin to realize that. And it's happened to me many, many times, where fear completely goes out. Doesn't matter what happens in that moment. Doesn't matter if I'll be beaten up, if I'll be arrested. There is a sense of inner peace and calmness that overcomes people in such times.
And I imagine, Sami, that then each of those experiences gives you more strength for the next one, more courage, more empowerment to then take on a bigger challenge.
For sure. Yeah. The second incident I wanted to share was 4 years later, when I was 16. They arrested my uncle. They put him on trial. They accused him of being a threat to the national security of Israel. A peaceful, nonviolent activist was seen as a threat to the security of an entire country. And they decided to deport him for that reason. Never allowed him to return and live in the land of his family, in the land of his ancestors, since this is 1988, that deportation happened. And again, that incident, when the court issued the deportation orders, they were immediate. So they had to take him immediately from the courtroom to the airport to deport him. And hundreds of us were outside the courthouse demonstrating, sit-ins, protesting against his arrest. And when he came out of the courthouse, even though there were police barriers between us and them, he was walking down the stairs, and his hands were cuffed, his feet were cuffed, and there was a chain between his handcuffs and his leg cuffs. And he was even trying very hard to get down the stairs. And in a split second, he turned to the crowd, and his eyes hit my eye. I'm like standing as a child, behind the barricades looking at him. And he looked at me and he smiled. And then looked away, and tears are coming to my eyes as I say this. And he just walked away like, wow, he won. He won. He proved the power of nonviolence. He proved that a whole entire nation, a whole entire system was so afraid of nonviolence that they had to put him on trial, embarrassed themselves. He's an American citizen as well. The US government even got involved to try to stop this charade of a court that he was in, and they still decided to deport him because nonviolence was stronger than their violence. And so these are the things that, like some of the stories that have happened in my life, that just make me stay in this. 30, 40 years later, I'm still in it, still engaging in it, still looking for the ways to engage in it, even in a much deeper and stronger way.
What I find so powerful, Sami, is that you're not just engaging on a day. There you are in Bethlehem, you're living the day-to-day, the tangible reality, but you keep pointing us to the mindset that perpetuates that reality. Not just dealing with the surface level, but whether it shows up in patterns or whether it shows up in, consciousness, what is it that is at the root of all of these systems of oppression, of structures of control and domination? And what's interesting, whether that's now or during your grandmother's time or even 2,000 years ago, during Jesus' time, how these things keep showing up, the patterns. And if we go to the root, is that a more effective way? So I would like to get into that. And yet, I also don't want it to be abstract, because there's so many criticisms that can be leveled that this is spiritual bypassing, this is, not practical, it's not lived, it's not true. And so it's sort of like how to walk that fine line, navigate these beautiful concepts and, even spiritual ideas, and not have it be grounded. So, and I think you do that well, but it is a challenge that we're in, that there's so much criticism being leveled at even nonviolence. I was just looking at an influencer yesterday. She said, wake up. People even like Mehdi Hassan, and that violence is the only response. It is the only thing that is categorically going to be effective. You cannot resist violence any other way. And it's just, so we're sort of in this fight, if you will, sort of in this question of what is effective. And I know you've looked at it throughout time. So I guess the question I have, to put it into consciousness, and is that what you're saying, that what is driving outward behavior on the individual level and the collective level, structures and systems and behaviors underneath that is consciousness? So we could even just start there, that, isn't that a worthwhile approach to take, because it's underlying everything, all the outward things that we see?
Yeah. I fully agree with you, because I don't want to minimize the realities that people live in daily violence and daily oppression. And definitely it's not about sort of creating this bigger story behind it and saying, yeah, only if we address consciousness, then everything will be fine. And we've seen so many people that are engaging in work, just come together and let's do this and let's do that and practice this and practice that, and everything will be fine. Find your inner peace and find your inner centeredness. And I've been around a lot of these these spaces, and I tried these spaces thinking, oh, maybe if I do this, maybe if I join this retreat and do this thing, or follow this guru, or follow these teachings, or and it doesn't work. It doesn't work, because what I've realized is that this is much deeper than just to talk about consciousness. This is so embedded in us, these structures and systems of separation, of division, of fear, of how I define what is right and what is wrong. Even the concept of identity itself exists in us, and then we take all of these things as granted as human beings. But identity creates separation, and separation creates possibility of conflict, and conflict creates separation for violence to happen as well. And so these systems and structures are deeply, deeply embedded in us. And throughout history, if we look at history, and this is the question that many people ask, is why do we stay in war? Why do we stay in conflict? Knowing that it's not working, knowing that those who have more power end up dominating those who have less power, until those who have less power gain enough power to dominate again, and that back and forth, that cycle of violence that we talk about. Why does it exist? Knowing how it affects all of us. I mean, we see, this last war, who knows if it's stopped already or not, how it affected every single human being when the US and Israel just decided to bomb Iran for absolutely no reason. It affects all of us. And so why? What is the purpose of this? And where does this come from? And that's where it became strong for me, this feeling that there is a field out there that we are in that's called consciousness. I call it the prevailing consciousness that we all grow up in, every human being, unless you are in certain tribes, maybe in the Amazon, that haven't had any contact with outside sources. I don't even want to call them civilizations, but outside sources. But especially for the last 3,000-4,000 years, and I would say even the last 2,000 years, we have been embedded in systems and structures that enforce fear within us. If it's our religions or our political systems, allegiance, loyalty, belonging is all about fear and how much you give to that system, how much you surrender to those systems and structures of power, how much you give from yourself to them. And as I said, it's very, very deep. Again, even in our relationships, even in our love relationships, these systems exist. And so this consciousness is, again, what I call the prevailing consciousness is prevailing. It's so strong that we don't even see it, and we work within it.
It's the air we breathe, but we don't even recognize it as the air we breathe.
Yeah, exactly. As I write in the book, I call it, when like the content is the water, the context is the riverbeds that move the water. And that's what we see. We see the water, we see the riverbeds, we see the lakes, we see the fountains, we see the waterfalls. The context is the atmosphere itself that holds all of this together. It's the gravity, for example, that holds all of this together. It's there, but nobody goes to a beautiful park and says, wow, gravity is amazing today. Look how the water is flowing down the stream. We're not aware of it. At the moment we become aware of it, to say, okay, there is something beyond me that is working. Can I be aware of it? And what does awareness mean of it? And that's very, very powerful, because the moment I become aware, then I step out of the automatic response system that I grow up in. The moment I'm aware that I'm looking at something as good or bad, right or wrong, just the awareness itself creates access for transformation. If I hear you say something and I say, oh, I don't agree with her, instead of that being automatic, like, okay, I'm consciously aware of me thinking I don't agree with Janessa. Where does this come from? What does this mean? What is a new discussion that I can create, for example, in the space, instead of just saying, oh, I don't agree with you. And then I don't agree with you. Then I go to judgment, then I go to labeling you, and then. And instead of stopping it and say, okay, there is disagreement happening in me. How do I deal with this? Where is it coming from? And it could also be coming from my fear that maybe you are actually right. I don't want to agree with you. And so consciousness work is very, very powerful. And I'll go back to that point and say that I fully agree. Most people who practice consciousness are bypassing, are avoiding, are creating at best band-aids to address our deep wound in this issue, and not ready to really engage in the deep work. And the deep work for me also means, and this has been my big learning, is that, as I said, the systems of this consciousness exist within us and around us. And it's not just about changing me. It's not about going to a retreat in the Amazon or a silent retreat in India and changing me. It is about addressing the systems and the structures that keep separation and violence embedded. And that for me is where resistance comes in. And most spiritual practitioners, sadly, are not ready to engage. They are avoiders, they step out. They actually claim to say that if I engage with the worldly issues, then my inner, alignment of my chakras will be disturbed and I lose my inner peace. That for me has become such a trigger point. I cannot accept this. These are people that are actually still embedded in the system of separation, of binary. They become the us and the them. We are the spiritual, we are the enlightened, we are the new creation, and then there's the rest of the world. That's the same system. They're just using different words to show themselves as better than other people. And that's why for me, the teachings of Jesus, realizing now the teachings of Jesus that I grew up in exactly in what they really mean, shows me that Jesus was engaged in personal transformation work, in awakening us to the possibility of that consciousness that he called kingdom, and at the same time understood that this is not going to happen without dismantling the structures that will continue feeding generation after generation of fear, of scarcity, of separation, of patriarchy, of us versus them. And so we have to do both work. So resistance is key in this work, I feel.
But Sami, do you think that he was 100%, of course, the inner peace and the spiritual realm he was focused on, but do you think he was tangibly resisting the authorities that were at the time? You know, that he wasn't some Jewish liberator against the Roman Empire.
He was a liberator to liberate us from all the systems and the structures that we had fallen into. And he understood very, very well that it is not just the Roman Empire, it is not just the rabbinical Jewish hegemony over the Jewish people. They are all part of the same. That's why he wasn't sort of target resisting. Sorry, I should be correcting myself, because when he was target resisting, he was resisting his own leaders for their failures and really manifesting what he felt Judaism is all about, which is this transformative service oriented to the world, to be agents of justice and righteousness. This is what I think Judaism was supposed to be. And so he resisted. I feel he resisted. He resisted in a very particular way. He engaged in conversations. He provoked many, many times the leadership, both the Roman and the Jewish leadership. He provoked them. I think he is the greatest provocateur. Is that what we would call him?
Provocateur, yeah, I don't know.
And at one point, if we just look into his sort of ministry, the 3 years ministry, if we look into like the sort of the tools of engagement that he did. So he would talk to them. He would try to engage in what we call today dialogue. He would sit with them. He would argue with them. He would tell them it was said this, and I say this to you. This is what it really means. So there were the conversations that he was having, and then he actually upscaled into little actions that he was doing. If, you know, healing on the Shabbat, or having his disciples pick grain and eat on Shabbat, doing different things. So it went from dialogue to action. And again, the invitation has always been, like, he's the founder of nonviolent resistance in that way. And Martin Luther King actually kind of follows that stream. You say, you have to talk to your oppressor. You have to talk to your, and show the grievance that you are in. If they are convincing conversation, great. But if not, then you move into action. And then Jesus moved into these smaller actions. So it wasn't just talking, it was talking. And now I'm doing these things that are, according to you, violating the law.
Illegal.
And then that didn't work. So what was the last thing that he did to really, really show them how the system is wrong and needs to be changed? And they didn't listen to him and didn't respond to his small actions other than mockery. He went into the temple. And to understand, like, go into the temple, go into the belly of the beast and turning the tables over. This is not just an action that you come up with on the moment. He understood very, very well the price and the consequence of doing this action. And I think he reached the point where he felt, right or wrong, I'm not sure, he felt there's nothing else that he could do, that he needs to turn the table over. And when he turned the table over in the temple, it's not just about the Jewish temple. It is also about the relationship with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire that gave precedent and gave sort of the cover for that structure to exist. So he was insulting both the hierarchy here and the hierarchy here, and showing both that systems and structures embedded in hierarchy and power over and manipulation and using fear for religious reasons, for economic reasons, for whatever reasons, these systems and these structures need to be dismantled. They cannot exist. And so he took that action, and I think he paid the price for what he did on that day. That was the line that he was crossed. They allowed him to be in these other spaces. And if talking is allowed, dialogue is wonderful, dialogue is nice, dialogue brings people together and they're nice to each other. But if dialogue doesn't go into action, then it's a failure for me as well. And that's why we have to be very careful in dialogue spaces today, because it's not just about changing one or two people's opinions on what's happening. It's then how do we come together and begin to resist the systems and the structures that are suppressing other communities and other people. And so he really engaged, I think, in a powerful process. And at the same time, like you said, he was engaged in this from a different consciousness, a consciousness where he had, and so when we talk about his consciousness, it's the consciousness of vision, it's the consciousness of possibility, it's the consciousness of what can be created beyond these systems of violence. And that's why I think he was more engaging with this work in his community. He was building the alternative structures of community and how he was teaching and dealing with his disciples to create the sort of the groundwork for these future systems of how societies should live. And at the same time, he was resisting the structures that be.
Do you give thought, Sami, as to how much of our time or focus or energy should be spent dismantling the old structures and system versus creating the new?
I don't think it is sort of like a seesaw thing, how much weight you put here and there. I think it is something you engage in simultaneously. You do it together. Because part of creating the new systems and structures is asking what needs to be dismantled within me to create these systems.
So within me at the same time as without.
At the same time, because if he just wanted to teach his disciple new ways, he would have taken them really to the desert or somewhere in the mountains of the Galilee and build a community and said, this is what we're going to do.
And that would have been working on dismantling the fear with the purification within. But he didn't just focus on purification within. You mean he took them out?
Well, I would even say that to prove purification from within, you have to face the reality from the outside. This is the test. The test to know if I'm still affected by separation, by patriarchy, is through relationships, through experiences. The moment I talk about, I have found my inner peace, and then
you
I
go to a
walk
checkpoint. Exactly.
Yeah, you see, we're thinking the same thing. I go to a checkpoint, then all the triggers, all the fears, all the hesitation, all the insecurities, everything pops in me. So what does that mean? So here it is. This is the test. So part of me is I have to do my inner work, and at the same time, I have to work on dismantling these systems and structures from the outside that keep creating this. Even if I reach the point where I am able to get to a checkpoint and be super spiritual and mindful, that checkpoint is still suppressing and oppressing thousands of Palestinians on a daily basis. And the moment I put myself in a place of purity to say I have achieved a higher consciousness than the rest, again, I fall back into the trap of hierarchy and patriarchy and separation and me being better than them. So it's an amazing, complex weaving of everything that's happening every single moment of my life. And to understand, yes, we need to create alternatives, and these alternatives need to be, well, there's the example of the person who went to plant the seeds, the sower who planted the seeds. Remember that one? And he threw seeds and they landed in different places. And some seeds landed on the rock and they started growing, and then they died very quickly. And the ones that between the thorns ate them. And the ones on the street, they were toppled by people. And then there are the ones that were thrown on the fertile ground, and they're the ones, or the dug land that was ready. Now that land did not dig itself by itself. Nobody thinks about that, And if we're going to keep throwing our seeds in the prevailing consciousness that is thorns and rocks and strong pavements that are going to be toppled, anything that we are going to manifest and to bring is going to fail. And we've seen this. Spiritual leaders and teachers and what we call gurus have existed since time began. And many of them have had amazing teachings. Why are we still in violence? Why are we still in war and separation? Is because most of these teachings, they were throwing their seeds in the places where the land wasn't ready for the seeds. And for that land to be ready, it had to be tilted. Somebody had to come in. Somebody had to move the land, clear the stones. These structures, the thorns, the rocks, the hard roads had to be removed for those seeds to be planted in. But the seeds needed to be seeds as well. Some people also needed to understand that they are seed carriers as well. And so the farmer is both the carrier of the seed that is to be planted and the person that is tilting and removing the rocks and the thorns from the ground at the same time.
Where are you seeing the fertile ground right now?
Oh, what a good question. This is the work that we need to do. Where are we digging up the thorns and digging up the rocks to make that ground fertile? It's a very, very difficult question. And it's a question that I'm living continuously, especially here in Palestine, knowing what the occupation is doing and the injustice that's happening, and knowing that most people are in survival. Most people here really are, how can we just survive another day, not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring? And literally, people don't know what tomorrow brings. Many times, I think of it also for me and my family. The Israeli army can't come into my house at any time and say, okay, you've pushed a little bit too much now and you're talking, we're taking you. It could happen any day. And so most people are in that survival mindset. And so, yeah, maybe at this point, it is not in these places where genocide is happening, where people are really just trying to get medicine and bread and water to save themselves. And that's why we begin to think, where else? And where else, I would say, at this time in life, it is where privilege exists, where it might be even the more difficult because it's not just about survival now, because now you're losing the possibility of the privileges that you have, especially in the West, if you begin to tilt and remove the thorns and remove the rocks from the ground. And so I think if there is a place that we need to be engaging in that will have the possibility of even having a global effect, it is to resist the systems and the structures that exist in what we define as the developed or the Western world, where colonialism actually came from, where hegemony came from, where capitalism came from, where it is the belly of the beast in the real sense of the word today. Sort of the temple of our modern times where the tables need to be turned over. And the question is, who is ready to do that? Who is ready to really engage in this work? Because, as you said, there is no bypassing here. This is not just about a bunch of retreats happening in New Mexico or North California. It is about what is happening in Washington, D.C., what's happening in our corporate systems and our structures that are manipulating and using and bringing fear. And even in our religious institutions, what we're seeing happening in religion and spirituality in the West, how it's been co-opted into this fascist system. And yeah, this is not easy, but I think this is where, at this point, this is where it needs to happen. When I was in the US on this last trip, the title of my speech was From Occupation to Empire, reassessing resistance and how do we change resistance. How do we say, yes, I love it when there are people that are standing in solidarity with Palestine in the US or in Europe. Part of it has become kind of mainstream. It's become a safe space to actually say, I'm pro-Palestine, anti-Zionist. And for me as a Palestinian using that identity, it's, songs to my ear when I hear this. But then what happens to the rest of your days when you are not in the demonstration or the protest? How are you engaging in the system that feeds occupation and resistance, but also feeds what's happening in the US itself and all of the violence that's taking place there? And then so it is a lot of work. And then I want to say, you come from sort of a military background and you understand. And I think one of the challenges we have as people that are engaged in resistance, and I use this word now, resistance, nonviolence, peaceful, whatever we want to call it, resistance, is we don't have the training and the discipline to engage as those that are engaged in fascism and militarism. They're trained, they're programmed, they go into spaces, they put time and energy and effort. Sadly, we don't have that. I don't want to label what we have, but we don't have that level of daily discipline and commitment to say.
And you mean that as a movement?
As a movement.
As a peace movement?
Definitely as a peace movement. Our movement is more sort of this, and I'm criticizing it because I'm part of it, so I have the right to do this. It's not just emotional bypass, it's also creating these, what we think peace work now is, because that term has been so distorted, is creating spaces where everybody feels safe, everybody feels belonging, everybody feels their voice is heard, everybody's little triggers are being addressed in a way that makes them feel included and inclusive in a certain bubble. And we're putting so much time and energy in that. And I'm saying it's not about not doing that. But then at some point, Gandhi called it the nonviolent army, because he understood there is discipline, that sometimes there are certain personal things that I need to put aside at this point because there's a bigger battle that I need to be engaged in. And if I'm worried about, or triggered by somebody who said something mean to me in a space,
then the moment you walk outside, that space is no longer safe. It's real life.
So for me, there's something that we've lost in the peace movement, that we're missing this. That's that sacred warrior, that sacred feminine, masculine warriors that are really standing for truth, speaking truth to power, and are not, yes, whatever triggers exist, I can hold them until the day comes where it is right for me to address these triggers in me. But there's a bigger battle that we're up against. And the other side, whatever we want to call it, is very well organized, very well established. It's not that they are stronger than us. Definitely not. But they have created systems and structures. The whole system actually feeds them in their power game. And so what is the system and structures that we are creating to help us in our resistance? And again, most people, because we are so embedded in this consciousness, we're afraid. We're afraid of losing the privileges that we have. What if I get arrested? Who's going to take my children to school? Stuff like this becomes the story that happens. Or I'll lose my job, if I say something and then my boss doesn't like it, they'll fire me. How can we step out of this? And say, yes, it's worth it. Yes, it's worth it. Yes, it's worth it.
I keep bringing up to the kids that I don't want to pay taxes to this military endeavors that we as a country are consistently launching, or backing Israeli genocide, all these ways. And so, what is that? 42% so what if I were to withhold 42% of the taxes? And it's my kids who are like, Mom, no, you'll go to jail. Oh, what will the kids at school say? Just like every time I bring it up, they just quash it immediately out of their fear of not having their mom around. And of course, as a mom, you're having to constantly balance that.
Of course.
With the realities. But, I'm just such a slave to history. Like, I want to, okay, well, what worked in this context? In civil rights movement in India, was it the oppressed who finally, found that courage or the trigger? Maybe it wasn't having a leader. Maybe it was finding the salt. You've talked about that. Like, what is the thing that will trigger that massive uprising? But then in some other contexts, they're just in such survival mode, as you point out. There's no space to even develop that consciousness or to meet, because the society is so oppressed. They don't even want people meeting in groups or have time on their hand. And even in the West, so often we're slaves to the system that just has people working constantly, and then they numb out, on the feed or in Netflix. And so there isn't that space for consciousness. But what is unique in this time is the prevalence of tools like technology and the awareness of struggle across borders. And so what if it's not, okay, it's either up to the Palestinians or the enlightened Israelis or that it's those seeds in that fertile ground in each of the contexts and societies that support and embolden and nurture each other. respect regardless of identity, but it is actually a broader identity, just as we're seeing on the other side. I mean, military, look at Israel and U.S., how they support each other militarily and with intelligence and alliance and power and the propaganda even, that there is like a coordinated and strengthened and supportive, beyond nation states and identities, alliance. And we see that in small form on the other side, I know, quote unquote, other side, but, those struggling with injustice here are supporting the Palestinian movement or supporting here. And so if that could be cultivated and seen for what it is, that we're in this together, that what happens to you directly affects me, and what I do in my little part in resisting, calling attention to our military industrial complex or the budgets or gender dynamic, whatever it is, supports you. And even the awareness of that can start to help us build those linkages to strengthen our movement.
100% agree with every word you said. And this is what it's important. We can't be lone rangers in this work. We need to support each other. We need to stand with each other. We need to hold each other. When I am down, I know that you're moving. It's not about even you lifting me up. I know you're moving. That will encourage me to get up and continue to move. And we have to do this work. We have to do this work, the building mutual trust and respect between us as individuals that are really committed to this work. And this is why the inner work becomes important, because I need to heal what makes me feel not fully trusting somebody else who's doing this work, and create spaces again for these healings. And I loved even Jesus was teaching his disciples how to reconcile with each other. When you start having your struggles, he gave them actually a methodology of how to resolve conflict in community, in the group itself. And these voices are important, because I think what we are called to, many of us, and I love this because in just the few verses of the opening of the Sermon on the Mount, it's not just the Beatitude, but it's also the lines that come after the Beatitudes, which are also very important, where he says, blessed are the peacemakers. And then he says, as we're talking about, blessed are you when they persecute you, because as an authentic peacemaker, you will be persecuted. There are people out there that will not like you. It could be your friends, it could be your family, or it could be your church, it could be your organization, or the system of power. People will resist you. People will persecute you. And then he says, rejoice and be glad. My uncle's smile and the smiles of those in the civil rights movement when they were getting mocked, because this is the sign of success. But then the line after that is, because this is how they treated the prophets before you. So ultimately what we are called is to be prophets, to be the prophetic call in our communities. And a prophet is the compass. A prophet is the guide. A prophet is the one that has always challenged those who are in power. This is what prophets have done from the Jewish history to any indigenous history. Prophets are the ones that speak truth to power straight to those who are in power, and at the same time are guiding the community to the path to where we want to go. But then the two verses after that, when he says, you are the salt of the earth and you are the light of the world. This is who we are, and we need each other. One grain of salt cannot do the job. We need to come together to do this work. And we are the light, and us coming together is what will overcome darkness. And so there's, again, this is maybe spiritual or philosophical, but for me, it's also very practical, deep. What does it mean to be this? What can I do every day to manifest and become this? What is the action that I do? How am I being salt in my community? How am I being light in my community? How am I connecting with others? Exactly what you're saying, that are doing the same thing, and we support each other. So I'm fully for this. We have to organize. We have to come together. We have to heal the wounds that exist between us and really begin to create the alternative global vision of what we want this earth to look like.
I want to just bring up something that can be tricky, because sometimes, even in talking about being prophets, and in my faith tradition, a prophet is in the definition, prophet, it's a spiritual seer, and that's everyone. That this is not, just the leaders or the prophets, and they will lead the community. That every single one of us is a spiritual being, I believe. We're not just matter walking around. We're animated by the Spirit, and that we can see, we know, we have that intuition, we have that inner knowing, and it's just how much we tap into that. There's a spiritual seeing and knowing, and so each of us is a prophet. Because sometimes I think those of us in this work can feel like, well, there's prevailing consciousness, and we embody the new, the radical. We get it. No one else gets it. And we're the few. And then it leads to this, we do want to be lone wolves, because we're each like, the special one who has this secret understanding. Well, even in spiritual teachings reinforce that, the straight and narrow path. But really, it's how do we make that mass, everyone, this is the prevailing, the way things are. We're each a spiritual seer. We're each a leader. You know what I mean? There's equality.
For sure. And then that's why one of the greatest lines that many people have not been able to answer when Jesus says the kingdom is within you. And he's pointing to everybody and he's saying it's within you. But I guess what we're talking about is those who have chosen to engage in the work itself, to do the healing work, to go through the narrow gate. Because not even Jesus says not everybody is ready to do that. Most people like the wide gate and they go through it. And it's not going to lead to anything. But the few of us, and this is open for everybody for sure. There is no special about anybody to choose this path. And I like to say the path is easy but not simple. So everybody can do it, but it's not a simple path to choose. And it's the journey of the Beatitudes, as that I talk about in the book. What does it mean to become poor in spirit, in material, in relationships, in attachments? What does it mean to mourn and to grieve and to be aware? Like you're saying, every time my ego kicks in and the temptation for power and dominance and I am better than the rest comes in, then it's either me or the community around me that reminds me and says, go back to step one. Come on, Sami. What are you letting go of? What are you invited? We're inviting you. You're acting in a certain way where you're showing as if you're better than others in this space. Community is so key in this to help me. And the more people around me that are very clean and clear with me and straight with me and say, Sami, your ego's kicking in, you're beginning to, and I might go into my little resistance of what they say, but then I'll take a moment and say, oh, you're right. Yeah, there's something in me that's coming up. So that's why the journey of the Beatitudes is a spiral. It's an ongoing journey. And of course, the journey is letting go, bringing mourning. And then the first attribute of what we call a peacemaker is meekness. How are we moving in this world in humbleness and meekness in our relationships, in our conversations, and how we relate to other people, and reminding ourselves, how do we go back to this? How do we go back to this?
I guess my last question, and before I get to that, because one, I want your commitment that you will come back at some point.
For sure.
Because there's many other conversations to be had. Two, where would you suggest someone, Christian or not, how would they take the first step on this path to awakening?
Well, for me, this is an invitation for everyone. It is definitely not a Christian thing. And always, we have to always say that Jesus was not a Christian thing. If anything, it's Christianity that destroyed or dismantled or took those teachings off track at best. And that's so I would say Jesus was a person that came to bring a message, like many, many men and women before him and after him, bringing the same message to the world. There is nothing even about him being unique in any divine way, in my opinion, for what he did. Somebody asked me about his divinity. I said he lived his divinity in his lack of it by showing us what is possible for us to achieve. So that's very important for me. The first step for me is awareness. The first and last step for me is awareness, to become authentically and honestly aware of the self. What are the things that I am afraid of losing, that my ego, my being, my identity, my reputation depend on? The first step that Jesus did actually in his ministry, when he was anointed, let's say at the Jordan River, he went to the desert. He went for 40 days and 40 nights to the desert. He didn't have to do that. He was anointed. He was like John the Baptist in a way said, you're certified, go and teach. And he had all the teachings ready. Like he knew what his kind of mission in life was. But the first thing that he did was he went to the desert and fasted, disconnected. He reflected on himself, reflected deeply, and where the temptations came. Temptations, in my view, are not like, as the text says, the devil came and tempted. It's the inner demon, the inner devil within us, the ego within him that came to him and said, you've become a great teacher. You could stand on top of Jerusalem and everybody will listen to you. Why don't you do that? Metaphorically stepping in the temple and falling and the angels will come. Or the third one, which is you have great teachings. You could become a powerhouse in the prevailing consciousness. You could have all of these kingdoms bow down to you. What better would he, to say, I have become the king of the prevailing consciousness.
And don't we know some spiritual teachers like that, by the way?
Oh, yeah, I didn't want to mention any names. I started thinking of names too, yeah. And to say, I can make it big here. And the first temptation is, again, the physical, take care, okay, you've done the work. You've fasted for 40 days and nights. You've done the retreats. You've done the ceremonies. You've done the inner work. Now take care of your body. You deserve a reward. Always the reward is a physical reward that we get. And so for us just to be aware that, wow, these temptations are there and they'll always come. And to just, for me, the first step is to be aware. And then to look and see what spaces are there that can guide, can help you go through these journeys. I mean, you're here, I'm here, I'm sure we're ready to serve anybody that comes to us that is ready to take these steps. And like I said, there are many of us out there that are really, really committed to a global healing and transformation process.
I just love, Sami, and I really appreciate and want to underscore that what you're saying is that embarking on a peace journey is a spiritual journey, is an inner journey as well as an outer journey. And that those two are inextricably linked. You can't do one without the other. And that it's both. And I think so often it's framed as either inner peace, spiritual path, or the outward activist path. And your invitation is that those two are hand in hand.
Yeah. It is a journey of sacred awakening into sacred activism. Activism has to be part of it. The more I awaken to these systems and structures of how they have shaped me and made me, the less I have tolerance for them to continue shaping and manipulating others. And that's why I have to engage. Awakening, and many, many people have said this, awakening is the worst thing that can happen to me. Because when I'm awake, I'm aware.
It's the blue pill or the red pill or what exactly.
Yeah, I'm aware. And when I'm aware, I can no longer remain silent. I can no longer remain silent in seeing death and destruction happen in such a way. And the more I'm awake, the less I'm afraid actually to address this. Even fear of death begins to move away from me because I know that I'm doing the right thing. And so, it is a journey. But again, thank you for this point. You're right. It cannot just be the inner work. It is the outer work. And if we want to end violence on this planet, and so many people are experiencing violence, even in this last hour we spoke, how many women were raped, how many children were beaten up, how many people were killed, how many people were insulted. This is happening nonstop. And we just close our eyes and move on. And we have to do something about it.
And we won't be happy until we do. We can be in denial or numb ourselves, but we actually will be restless, we'll be discontent, we'll be unhappy unless we move in that direction.
100%.
Thank you so much, as always, Sami. It's such a pleasure to get into these topics on such a deep level. And I just so appreciate you.
Thank you. Mutual, Janessa. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much for listening to our conversation. I just love Sami's story of planting the olive tree. when at 12 years old, he was told, whatever happens, your job is to plant the tree. And when a soldier ripped it from the ground, Sami chose to plant it again. That's having the courage to keep acting for life when violence keeps trying to uproot it. So let's craft this week's peace practice based on that. Plant the tree again. So let's think about what is one place in our lives where peace has been uprooted, where hope, courage, or connection keeps getting uprooted. And in the face of that injustice, we can ask ourselves, what is an act of peace I can plant again today? And if it gets pulled up, we plant it again and again and again. And this is courage. This is true power. And if you're willing, please do share with us your act of peace at contact@peacespower.org. I need all the acts of hope and inspiration I can get. I know we all do. And I'll look forward to sharing them. That's all for today. Peace and power to you.
If this show speaks to you, please follow it. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every follow, review, and share helps more people discover the show and helps spread the power of peace a little further.